Hi everybody! So I'm gonna be filming my August reading wrap up. I had a pretty good reading month. Could have read more, but could have read less, so let's get into it. First up is The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy, Lefteri. As I mentioned in the books I brought with me to California, this was a gift in Christmas and I wanted to read it kind of before I got here, and I ended up finishing it on the plane ride over. The story itself is about Nuri and his wife Afra. It kind of takes place in two timelines, not timelines, but like timelines. One of them is the two as they are awaiting like entry into the UK. Like they're in the UK, but their status isn't clear whether or not they're going to be, I don't know, is it granted asylum or like refugee status. And so they're waiting in the UK. And then the other is like the timeline of how they leave Aleppo and get to the UK, like the process of being refugees fleeing. Nuri is a beekeeper, so the Beekeeper of Aleppo. His wife is a painter, and we learn that Afra has gone blind. The story deals a lot with not only the challenges that people face, but also the trauma that they experience. It kind of is like Slaughterhouse-5 in that, where you sort of have these moments of being ripped from kind of present day into the past. And the way that the author achieves this, let me show you an example. In the chapters that are based in the UK, it's just like, what is it? It's like chapter 5 or something. Chapter 11, which takes place in the UK. And then as chapter 11 ends, they're talking with this Lucy fisherwoman who is helping them throughout the asylum/refugee process. Please, she says, don't lose hope. That's the thing. There's a tone of resignation in her voice, and she's pulling at the strand of hair. This is what I always tell people. You see, never, never, never lose. So it ends on lose, and then hope is the last word. And then the next chapter starts, hope was fading, dwindling like the fire in the night. And that is Afra and Nuri as they are in Athens. So it kind of flows into it, and it reminds me of this, like, how memories and post-traumatic stress, like it pulls you from the moment you're in. And that's why I'm saying it's a lot like Slaughterhouse-5 in that. I think it's an interesting technique. I also think Lefteri has a really artistic way of writing. The book focuses a lot too on Nuri having to take on so much responsibility, having to do so much work, and he is the one who is like determined to survive and determined to get to their family. And it feels like Afra is just so resigned throughout the whole process, and she's not wanting to participate, and you can see just this stress and how it's weighing on Nuri, who has to figure out all of these things and navigate the world that he himself does not know, and then also navigate it for his blind wife. I think one of the big things I didn't like about this is there's two twists that are very connected. And I saw that, like, you see them coming from a mile away. It's really obvious what's happening. And I think in a way, the book didn't need those. Like, it could have talked about the trauma of this without those two elements. And I do think, one thing that I do like about the book is that Lefteri is dealing a lot with things she has experience with. So in the back of the book, she talks about her own family's experience being refugees, and also the time she volunteered with refugees from Syria. So she's, you know, while she does not have like the Syrian experience, she isn't talking outside of her wheelhouse in a way. And she did have people go over this book and, like, from what I understand, you know, give their perspective, including one man who was a beekeeper, and that's where she got the idea of having her main character be a beekeeper. And I did like that element. I did think that there were parts of this that felt just very, very honest, but I don't know, I don't know, I just think there was something kind of missing from it. But one element I did like in a dark way is that Nuri oftentimes reflects and sort of says, like, he wished he he wished his wife was dead, and it's not in the sense of I want to kill her or I don't love her. It's that this would be easier. Like, if she was not dealing with these things, that would be easier for her. And I think that's something that's just, it's so dark, but there's a sense of honesty of like, you wouldn't have to see the world around you crumble in this way. Like, you're having to witness this horrible, horrible thing, and I wish I could save you from that witnessing. I thought it was a beautiful and dark conclusion, and she really is a great writer. So while it wasn't my favorite, I don't think it's something like, I think I would recommend it to a lot of people. Next up, I already did a review on this. It Ends With Us. I don't have a lot to say about this. I didn't like this book. If you want to know my very extended thoughts on that, you can watch that video, but there's nothing more to say. I read this, Buddy read this with a friend. I don't like Hoover's writing style. I thought while the story was an interesting twist on the romance genre, it did not tell the story in the way it should have. It left a lot to be desired. Okie dokes. Next up is Flowers of Mold by Ha-seong Nan, translated by Janet Hong. This is a short story collection. I'll talk about this and the next, or like some other books in my like Women in Translation month. The book kind of positions itself like it's going to be this like creepy, disturbing tale, different tales, but I didn't find it that disturbing. I just found like disquieting. I don't know if that's the term, but it's not creepy. It sort of is just these people who have been shifted, like the world around them is expecting something that they can't deliver on, or I don't know, very much like quiet quitting, or the laying flat philosophy in China of like the world is, there's this rat race going on, the world is modernizing, things are getting more expensive, and I can't keep up. And the way in which people can't give up, the way that Ha describes that is in these really unique ways. And some of these are a bit more kind of off the wall than others. Some are very kind of cut and dry. Like the one of my favorites in this is The Retreat, and The Retreat has like very like no magical realism elements to it. But then the story before that, which I think is like, yeah, Wax and Wings, that's very out there in what's happening. So yeah, it's like, I just feel like the stories, there could have been a little more connective tissue to them, but it was still really good. I just don't know how much I would recommend this to other people. But yeah, definitely want to check out more of her work. Like, don't regret reading it, I guess is how I would say it. Next up, I read Darius the Great Is Not Okay. This was a book club that I'm a part of. This was a pick for that. And I have to say, I give this 3 stars, but I give it 3 stars because of who I am as a reader. I don't read a lot of YA. So the story was just never going to be something that was going to get a high rating from me. But if I was to be a YA reader, I think this would probably be like a 4.5 stars if I was that type of reader. The story itself deals with, I feel like I always say it, the story itself. The story is a young boy, Darius, who is half Persian, and he is going to Iran, to Yazd, to see his grandfather. I think for the first time meet his grandfather and like family in real life, not on a computer screen, because his grandfather is very ill with brain cancer. And the story deals a lot with his feelings of being alone and isolated, his sense of inadequacy as a Persian. He calls himself a fractional Persian all the time, and his very strained relationship with his white father. Even though the two have some commonalities, namely their depression and their love of Star Trek. Things I loved about this book is that the author, who I can't remember the author's name, I'll like pop it up somewhere here. The author does a super good job of making Darius a well-rounded character with interests, like his interests in nerdy things is very well established, and his interest in his own culture. Even though he doesn't speak the language, he talks all the time and is always giving the reader tidbits about what it means to be Persian and things that Persians like and things that Persians don't like, and the ways in which he falls in line with true Persians and where he does not fall in line. And I think that's really beautiful that he created this character who has multiple facets and multiple interests and does just feel like a teenager, like truly a teenager. Even from Darius's questioning of, am I normal? Is this okay? Is this how people, is this normal to feel this way? That was just such a great, I don't know, great inclusion. And I loved that while Darius is suffering from depression and while Darius is suffering from a sense of not being a true Persian, those things were happening at the same time. He was dealing with multiple struggles at the same time. I think the one element of this book that I wasn't like as much in love with is his relationship with his father ends up being a very big part of the novel, and I respect that because of what he's relating to. He's relating to his father and his depression, so the idea that that's important is incredibly understandable. But I think I was coming into this book wanting much more about his experience with Persianness rather than his relationship with his father. Like, I wanted him and his grandfather's relationship. I wanted more of that. I wanted more of him and his mother's relationship. And I don't feel like as a reader I got that. The focus was a lot on his father. There is a sequel to this book. I'm not going to read it, but I still do think it's a good book, especially for people who, you know, do come from like mixed ethnic backgrounds. This is probably a character you'll be able to relate to. Next up, we have Mikeo Kawakami's Breasts and Eggs, another woman in translation pick for myself. This, I feel like, I don't know. Like, I love Kawakami's writing style, so for me, I'm always having a good time when I'm reading her writing. But at the same time, I don't think that this is something that everyone will like. The first part is chef's kiss, great. It deals with the main character. So there's the main character Natsuko, her sister, her older sister Makiko, and then Makiko's daughter Midoriko. And so Makiko comes seeking breast augmentation to Tokyo from Osaka, and she's going with her daughter Midoriko, who is not talking to her mother, and Natsuko's just kind of there witnessing all of this. And I loved that story because it talked so much about your body. It really dealt with breasts and eggs. It felt like three women in different positions, and them, their wants, their needs, their desires, their concerns, their anxieties about femininity and their bodies and aging and all that. Like, it was really about the title, and it felt really involved, and it was nice seeing these different characters' perspectives, especially like Midoriko's like journal entries or whatever they were. Those were just, I loved reading them. I loved hearing what this girl was thinking. The second part, it was, again, because I like Kawakami's writing, I enjoyed it. However, it did not have nearly the bite of the first part. And as a story itself, it I didn't think it talked about the things that I wanted to read. Like, the things that I enjoyed about the first part weren't discussed as much in the second part. The second part, which, okay, the end of this book, the inside flap, describes this. On another hot summer's day 10 years later, Natsuko, on a journey back to her native city, struggles with her own indeterminate identity as she confronts growing old alone. No, that's not what the second part of the book was about. It is over probably it is months and months and months. It's not one day, one day in a hot summer. No, it takes place, I think, over a year. She is confronting whether or not she wants to have a child and how she will do that despite not wanting to have sex and not being in a relationship. And the first story, I feel, deals a lot with being a woman, and the second part of the story, I feel, deals much more with the ethics and morality of having children, why people want to have children, whether or not that's a good decision. It talks a lot about artificial insemination, and the character both has her own questions about that, and then she meets characters who are intimately involved in that in some way, and how they're dealing with it, and what the repercussions of that are. And it was a cool story. I just didn't think it talked so much about like women and our bodies, and that's kind of what I was hoping for in the story. Books and Pizza, I watched her review, and she said like the introduction of men was unnecessary, and that's kind of how I feel. Like, I don't think I wanted to read about men in that, and I feel like if it was going to be that story, I wish I had known about that coming in more, because I wouldn't have left feeling like a little bit disappointed. So yeah, still, again, if you enjoy Kawakami's writing, you're gonna enjoy Kawakami's writing, like, no matter what. So still like a good book, but not what I was expecting. Also, I don't think I mentioned the translators are Sam Bett and David Boyd for this. Okay, the last book I read was Uzumaki by Junji Ito. I talked about this in like the books I've bought in California. It's great. It's super creepy, very creepy, but in this out of your mind weird creepiness that you couldn't even think of. It's not the jump scares. It's not the Stephen King kind of obvious horror. It's this weird thing that builds up and just gets weirder and weirder and weirder, and you are left kind of trying to figure out where this got started. Beautiful. There's tons of, I feel like, videos about Uzumaki on BookTube, but it is a town, and the town becomes in a way infected with spirals, and like it kind of spirals out of control with these weird obsessions, and it starts out in these like mini sagas of like one character is afraid of spirals, one character's hair starts spiraling, like all of these weird things, and it definitely has this like nature element of how the natural world is spiraling too. Yeah, really cool. Definitely recommend, especially if you're not especially if you're not like a big manga reader, getting something like this where it has everything together rather than like buying up all the volumes. I think this was a really nice way to read this. So that's everything I read. It's getting really hot in here. It's gonna be an insanely hot weekend. Like in the area they're saying like 110 degrees in certain parts of the like near the Bay Area, kind of over the hill. So I'm really glad to be by the shore where there's at least some breeze, but it's still really hot in the sunlight. Okay, and currently reading, I wish I could have finished this. I really wanted to finish this in August, but I had a lot of personal stuff happen, so I wasn't able to finish Tomb of Sand by Geetanjali Shree, and translated by Daisy Rockwell. Still working on it. It's actually really nice to be able to read this right now, because it's a story of an older woman and her living with her daughter. That's like the part of it that I'm at now is when she's living with her daughter, and that is very similar to what's actually happening right now. My grandma is living with my aunt and my dad, and it's sort of nice to be able to see this author's reflection on that and then see it as like it's happening in my own family. So I'm happy to be reading this right now. I'm glad I didn't read it earlier. I'm glad I read it when I can relate to the story. And Shree's writing is just, she's so good. It is one of those books too where it's like kind of magical realism-y, but it's not. Like, it's just she writes with such beautiful metaphors that it feels like the sunlight is a character, but it is just how she describes the sunlight with such life and with such character. Oh God, like, I've highlighted or underlined so much in this book, and sometimes she writes something and it's like she has truly written a poem. So here's a line that I particularly loved. But who was there to witness it? Only the sunlight, which arrived each morning, kissing Ma's face, and then she would rise, and the two of them would sit and gaze affectionately at each other, Ma and the sun. just the imagery is so beautiful, and then the next chapter really goes into Ma and the sunlight and their like interactions together, and it's so beautiful. I'm enjoying sitting with this book. I'm sad I didn't finish it in August, but at the same time, I don't want this book to end. So yeah, thank you for listening to my August reading wrap up, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!